world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Sunday, January 25th. As I'm recording it again a little later than I would like, hoping to have it up either right around midnight Central tonight, barring any technical problems. And who knows if things stall out or things like that. But we got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, starting a little later than I would like, in part because I was trying to record some TikToks. I did get a couple recorded, and I was able to get them posted. However, there is an issue going on with TikTok right now. Hopefully, that sometime Monday it would be resolved. Basically, what is going on, at least from what I can gather. Now, there are some creators that are freaking out, but I don't think it's as big of a deal that requires a major freak out yet. If this goes on beyond a couple of days, I would say, then we can start worrying. But what is effectively going on is they are migrating TikTok over to the U.S. servers and the U.S. control. Now, you may remember that this whole thing came about because Republicans tried to play Democrats during Biden's term in 2024. Republicans in the House of Representatives, when they were in the majority, the Democrats were trying to pass a must-pass ally funding bill where we were going to give aid to allies and other countries and things like that. There was money for Taiwan, there was money for Israel, and I know you can argue that Israel didn't deserve it, but this was more humanitarian aid for Israel and Palestine than it was military aid. And Israel, right, wrong, or otherwise, is still an ally. So it was one of those things where they felt they needed to pass some funding. There was money for Ukraine, there was money for Taiwan, and a few other places. And the Democrats really wanted to push this foreign aid package. Now, Republicans hate foreign aid. That's why Donald Trump is doing everything he can to get rid of USAID, trying to say, well, we need to put Americans first, etc. Here's the thing with foreign aid that a lot of people do not understand or do not recognize. That being, when we do humanitarian aid, food aid, they are required by law to buy from American suppliers, American farmers first. There are a lot, or were a lot prior to Donald Trump, a lot of farmers who specifically went into planting season knowing they were going to be growing, thousands potentially of acres of corn or wheat or soybeans or what have you, specifically already sold to be used for foreign aid to help out other countries, to be helping out, places where they don't have access to as much food. And when it comes to military aid, one of the things they do it a couple ways. Sometimes they go through our stockpiles and go, okay, what are we about ready to replace anyway? What needs replaced? And they decide on a dollar amount of value of new materials that they are going to buy to replace the ones that are ready to be replaced. And we give whichever country we are helping, whether that is Ukraine or whoever, we give them those supplies, those weapons, etc., whatever that may be. Because now I've never served, but I have friends who have, and they were telling me that those munitions, a lot of cases, have a shelf life that that gunpowder can potentially go bad, that the government wants to replenish their stock every so often. etc. So we look through all of that and we give them our surplus and we buy new for our military. Or we go to US manufacturers and say, hey, we need to buy XYZ, whatever that is. And we put out a dollar amount of whatever we agree to sell, either to send whatever country it is, and whether it's guns, whether it's bullets, whether it's tanks, whether it's planes, whatever that might look like, we put in calls to U.S. manufacturers, and then those get um, manufactured, which then puts money in the economy. So either way, it's a good thing. Well, Republicans don't like foreign aid. So they were trying to kill this foreign aid package that the Democrats wanted to pass. They attached the TikTok ban to a foreign aid package. They thought they had a gotcha. They thought for sure that because they passed it in the House, and yes, it did pass with bipartisan support. I'm going to get to that in a minute. They thought for sure, though, that they had something that was going to just make it so that we didn't, that the Democrats didn't pass this foreign aid package. Okay. But what they did, or what they didn't count on, was the Democrats saying, okay, sure, we'll play your game. And when it got to the Senate passed it too. Joe Biden signed it with the TikTok ban in place. Now, they had all kinds of bullshit reasons as to why there was a TikTok ban. They claimed national security. They claimed China had our data and all of this, except for the fact that most US data was stored on US servers. The big thing was, and I am not nearly as up to date on technology as I used to be, but the algorithm and other things were stored in China and Singapore. Um, but they kept saying it was national security, et cetera, and it was gonna hurt China, except for the fact, or that China was gonna hurt us, except for the fact that China doesn't even allow its own citizens on TikTok. But that's another story. But anyway, they had all their reasons or so-called reasons for the ban, and they thought for sure Democrats were gonna, you know, were gonna say no. Democrats said, "Yeah, we'll play your game," so they passed it. And the Democrats were looking at everything like I was looking at it and said, well, look at how bad the Republicans did. The House of Representatives barely passed anything. They were completely dysfunctional. Donald Trump is running for president. He was completely worthless during his last term. Look what he did with COVID. There's no way the Republicans win. And we were thinking that the Democrats were going to keep the Senate barely, probably 50-51 seats, and they were going to uh, flip the House. This was, of course, before Joe Biden dropped out, before he had that disastrous um, debate with Donald Trump, and before we failed the open book test that was before us. But I think what the Democrats had planned, and maybe I'm crazy for thinking this, was that they didn't intend to fully block TikTok or ban TikTok. The deadline was set for January 19th, one day before the presidential inauguration. And I think they did that intentionally. And I think what they were hoping for, why the Democrats agreed to it, was that they would have won in November of 24. Okay. The new Congress would have taken over January 3rd of 25 last year, and the new president wouldn't be sworn in until January 20th. Well, the TikTok ban set to expire the 19th. And I think the Democrats were expecting to have, even if they lost the election, they thought they would probably have both chambers of Congress at the minimum. That they could push something through Congress and Joe Biden would sign it on his way out the door, eliminating the TikTok ban, and that they had actually played an Uno reverse on the Republicans. Except that's not what happened. We get to the election in 24. We fail the open book test. We put the Republicans back in charge, even knowing everything that they were talking about doing, and we see what they are talking about, what is going on. And now this is what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with the outcome of that. And now TikTok was required to be sold. Now, Donald Trump had kept pushing off the TikTok deal by almost a full year. Now, per the law, he was only supposed to be able to extend the ban one time for 90 days, but he kept giving it an extension. And now, why does that work? Well, it worked only because nobody challenged it. Nobody brought a lawsuit to court trying to force this administration to actually ban TikTok. You may remember last year how crazy it was for about 18 hours or so when TikTok was gone. TikTok went dark and then they turned it back on. And of course, Donald Trump comes out, says he's going to save TikTok, and TikTok agrees to turn everything back on. Okay. That's how we got here. Now, TikTok is having some issues right now with the new ownership. Um, as I'm recording this, videos, and I'm not the only creator seeing it. I was in a couple live rooms just for a few minutes here and there with a couple creators that one in particular you may know from YouTube and TikTok, Tom Powell Jr. He gave up mostly talking politics and stuff, and he hasn't done hardly any TikTok lives um, in months because ever since they banned his main account with I think it was 1.2 million followers. He said, "Well, I'm just not going to, why would I go live there, force you guys to, uh, you know, force them or give TikTok the money from me being live." Or from him being live, I guess, is the proper way to talk about that. And he said, I didn't do it, but he went live because of the issues getting content posted. And it wasn't just affecting, um, you know, TikTok by itself. Now, I've talked before how I have everything automated, or at least mostly automated. Um, and I have a couple of TikToks. I was able to get two posted. I had more I was going to do, but was not able to. And because of whatever issues they were having, it also kicked the automation process out. And I'm waiting for that to resolve itself. Now, if it does at some point, hopefully both of those will get out to you so we can talk about it. But I'm also going to talk about it here on the podcast. So that's what's going on with TikTok right now. We are going to have to be patient with TikTok and hope as they work through it that it comes out the other side. Now, we've talked before. One of the things I want to remind everybody in this TikTok ban is a good, or not ban, but difficulty that these server problems and whatever they are having is a good reminder for everybody. If you follow creators, any content creator, I don't care if it's me, I don't care who it is, and you like whatever they do, if they are on other social media platforms, you should also follow them there. Why? A couple of reasons. One, it helps the creator out. Okay, for example, every platform that has a monetization option, and not everybody's doing this for money, but you have to meet certain thresholds to get monetized. Um, and subscriber count, follower count, in almost every case, is one of the criteria. Then there's also watch hours, etc., which affect into it. One of the other things, even if you're not talking monetization, like for example on YouTube, you have to have, I think it's 50, it might be 100, it's either 50 or 100 followers before you are able to go live. Well, people following you actively helps that. I think TikTok at one point it was at least 1,000 before you could do a TikTok live. They may have changed it since. It's been a while since I hit that threshold. So following your favorite creators on other platforms is always a good idea. Also, Like I said, it helps them out. It may open avenues to them that they didn't have before, um, including the monetization options, uh, which for those people that are monetized and can make a living at this, great. That's good for them. And even if it just covers a little bit, every little bit helps. And if we're putting out content and whatever app, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, whoever is making money off of our content, the creator should get a cut once they meet that threshold. So that always helps there. All right, enough about TikTok and the bullshit. This went a little longer than I anticipated there, but we have a big news story to talk about. By now, you have probably seen the story from Saturday. It happened again. There was another uh, ICE, Border Patrol. It's conflicting stories. One or the other was involved in the shooting of an American citizen, a murder of an American citizen. Now, this one is different than what happened with Renee Good. You may remember the Renee Good case from, was it a week, 2 weeks ago? Um, this month has felt like the longest 6 years of my life because there's always so much to talk about. So it's hard to keep straight when these incidents happened. But this incident that happened on Saturday, it was during the protests against ICE. And this is only going to ramp up the protests, getting more people out there. I can't think of the guy's name. Uh, Petty, I think was his last name, Mr. Petty, was out, and there was a woman who was protesting, and ICE was trying to, I don't know if they were trying to take her to the ground, if they were trying to pepper spray her or whatever. And he was out recording, and he stepped in between trying to help this woman. I think they were trying to push her to the ground, or she was about to go to the ground, like stumbling over her own feet. The video I saw was not overly clear as far as what was going on with her, but he stepped in between ICE and them, and he was recording. Well, they hit him with pepper spray, and they got him to the ground. While he's on the ground, you can see them as he is on the ground. I believe he was cuffed. You can see them pummeling him, pistol whipping him, etc. Now, Mr. Petty was a licensed, registered gun owner, and he was carrying, and he had it in a holster on his hip. And what happened is, you can see in the video, in one of the angles, you can see where one of the ICE officers picked up his gun from his hip, who was not in his possession, and they walk away. And at some point, I don't know if it was the gun that Mr. Petty had, if it was somebody else, something happened, a gunshot goes off, then all of a sudden you see these agents with this man lying on the ground, having apparently already been shot once. They put about 10 or 12 more rounds into him. And the media has already started to spin this, at least the right side, and the Republican lawmakers, etc. Of course, they are calling him a domestic terrorist. I've seen posts, not video. There is no video evidence that shows him brandishing the firearm, but posts and comments by Republicans and Republican lawmakers and spokespeople, etc., saying, well, if he wouldn't have been pointing his gun at ICE, if he would have complied, if he would have followed orders, he wouldn't have been shot. The only part of that, if it were true, that potentially could have gotten him shot was if he was brandishing the weapon. But he was not. It was holstered. He was legal to carry it, and he was exercising his Second Amendment right. Well, now he was killed. Minneapolis police was actually already on the scene. They have secured the crime scene, from what I understand, and they are able to have jurisdiction, the way I understand it, because they beat the feds there. they are going to have a much easier time proving a state charge case against these officers. But I'm seeing again posts from people on the right saying, well, if he would have complied, he wouldn't have been shot. Well, let's go back. Let's look back at January 6th, 2021, the day that they say was such a peaceful stroll through the Capitol. They tell two versions of that story. First, they talk about January 6th, and they say, well, the Republicans, the MAGAs that were in there, they were just on a tour. It was peaceful. They didn't do anything. They were just there. They were protesting. It was fine. But then you hear about the things like windows being broken and cops being beaten. And anybody who did that, according to MAGA, was a paid protester, a paid antagonist. They were a plant by the FBI to make Donald Trump look bad. But they forget when they talk about that it was Donald Trump who was president, so it was his FBI at the time. So again, doesn't make any sense. But they're trying to justify the bad behavior that their fellow MAGAs did, and trying to say, well, see, it wasn't really that bad, or it wasn't really our fault. Well, then you had on January 6th coming through a window after being told to stay back, to stay out, and did not follow lawful orders was Ashley Babbitt. Ashley Babbitt gets shot and killed by Capitol Police. And all we can hear about from the right, I know at one point Donald Trump was talking about giving her, I think, the Presidential Medal of Honor or Medal of Freedom or something like that, giving her some award. And they were talking about how she was a freedom fighter, and she was an innocent victim, and she was just murdered by police because they chose to kill her because she was MAGA. And what the reality that happened was she was coming through a window. The officer couldn't tell if his life was in danger. She wasn't listening to orders, and he had to make a decision when she kept advancing on him, as there is a crowd of people, all mob basically pushing through and all coming in. He had to make a decision. But see, they don't talk about how well she would have just complied with the order to, stay out of the Capitol, to stand down, that she'd be alive. No, to them, she's a martyr. But then you have both the case with Renee Good and Mr. Petty. And they end up, both of them were killed. Now, in the case of Renee Good, she was given conflicting orders. One officer told her to stay, one officer told her to go. And when she goes to go, she gets shot for it. Again, leaving a stop like that is not a reason to be shot. That is not deadly force. But they're trying to say in her case that it was justified because she tried to hit them with her car, but multiple angles prove it's not true. And now you have this man, Mr. Petty, who got hit with mace, pepper spray, whatever you want to call it, was on the ground getting beaten by cops, and then he gets shot. And the Republicans are trying to paint him to be some kind of domestic terrorist, and that he was a bad person, and that he was a threat to the agents, when he was already on the ground, detained and being beaten. Now, why are these ICE agents acting the way they're acting? Well, they're doing it because they feel they have immunity. Why? Because J.D. Vance came out and said that these ICE agents have full immunity. They do not. They have what is called qualified immunity. And with qualified immunity, agents are in all federal law enforcement, and even local law enforcement to some degree, are immune from charges if they are actively doing their job, and it's justified. Okay. For example, I'm going to throw out a what if here or a hypothetical. If Mr. Petty had actually been pointing his gun at the officers and they shot him, even if somebody is pointing a gun at you and you shoot him, you might get off on self defense. But normally you would not have justification to just shoot somebody. But see, because they're an officer and they were protecting people, but they're not going to get a criminal charge in that case. But in this case, you had somebody who was detained, who had been beaten, and who was on the ground and was not in possession of their weapon. None of that meets the criteria for the use of deadly force. Not to mention, a federal judge had to remind ICE to not use deadly force and to not interact with protesters who are just standing there peacefully protesting. Okay. But they want to paint this guy to be a bad man. Now he was an ICU nurse and I believe he was also part of the VA. He was he would be a nurse for the VA. That doesn't sound like somebody who would be a domestic terrorist. But they want us to believe that. They want you to believe the narrative that they are spinning. Do not believe what your lying eyes are telling you. Believe the narrative we tell you. So the Republicans are they're doubling and they're tripling down on this story. And of course, they're trying to make it look like the people on the left, the Democrats, they're the ones to blame. Donald Trump basically came out and tried to blame Joe Biden and Tim Walz and Democrats in general for the condition of what's going on in Minneapolis. Basically saying, well, if Minneapolis wasn't so poorly run, if it wasn't so ripe with fraud, and if it wasn't so lawless, these things wouldn't have happened. And if they weren't a sanctuary for illegal immigrants, this wouldn't have happened. However, both Renee Good and Mr. Petty uh, were American citizens. They had nothing to do with illegal immigration at all, other than uh, Renee Good was just trying to leave the area and go home. And Mr. Petty was there. Yes, he was protesting, but again, protesting is not a reason to be shot. We have always taken the right to protest has been something that has been ingrained in our culture since the beginning. I mean, one of the most famous acts that the Americans did in the Revolutionary War or in the lead up to the Revolutionary War was the Boston Tea Party. And if you don't know the story, which I'd be surprised, but if you don't, a bunch of patriots, freedom fighters, whatever you want to call them, they went in to a ship in the Boston Harbor that contained tea, and in an effort to basically protest the imposing of a tax on tea, they dumped all of the tea on this ship into the harbor, ruining it. And it is one of the things where, and while that is not necessarily a peaceful protest, it is a protest. And it is something we have done since the very beginning. It is not a reason to be shot or killed. But Donald Trump is, of course, trying to get us to believe that it's all the Democrats' fault. It's not his fault. The thing is, the blame lies at the feet of Donald Trump for multiple reasons. One, they have grossly expanded the budget of ICE. Under Joe Biden, under his last term, ICE had funding of $10 billion for a year. Okay. They have a budget of $10 billion. Plus, they passed in the one big bullshit bill an additional $18 billion in funding for ICE per year, at least through Donald Trump's term, bringing it up to almost 28 billion, almost triple of what it was before. That's a lot, okay? And in order to up and do all of the things when it comes to immigration enforcement that Donald Trump is wanting to do, they have to do, they had to bring in a bunch of people. And that's why we're hearing people like the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, the Three Percenters, the Patriot Front, and other right wing mafia groups are part of ICE now. These rejects that couldn't, in a lot of cases, make the regular military, they couldn't make regular law enforcement, have been trying to play patriot and play soldier for so long. These are the guys that go out and buy army surplus, and they buy the camo, and they organize themselves into a makeshift militia, and they train and they drill to be ready. Ready for what? Who knows? And they're the groups that we haven't heard much of since Donald Trump's been back in power. Now, they tried a couple times to come out and protest, even during the Biden administration. They tried during Donald Trump's trial for his 34 criminal convictions. They tried to protest in New York City, and they got ran out of town. But now Donald Trump has roped them into ICE. So you have a lot of people that are untrained in ICE. You have we find out they're not getting a lot of training. One of the things that came out early on as they started to expand ICE, as they were starting to take anybody who couldn't even pass the physical requirements. There was an internal memo talking about these ICE agents or these new recruits, and saying a lot of them were athletically allergic, which is hilarious. As somebody who is athletically allergic himself, who is out of shape, I know my limitations. I would never apply to be like in law enforcement, knowing I would have to pass a physical and I'd have to pass physical training, etc., and be able to do certain things. And I know I can't make those requirements, so I wouldn't try. But these guys still do, and they get passed on. And then if they find out if they had the word officer anywhere in their background, doesn't even have to be in law enforcement officer or anything, or military officer, because they ran it through AI, and AI is not there yet. There, it was looking for the use of that word, and it was cutting their training down even farther. So they're not doing the things that they are supposed to be doing when it comes to how they're supposed to do their job. And we hear some of how they are talking and how they are acting. They are a lawless group. They're doing whatever they want right now because they feel that, and to some extent they're right, that Donald Trump has their back, and because of that, he can do whatever he wants, or that these, ICE agents can do whatever they want at his behest. And Donald Trump trying to blame Tim Walz and Democrats for what's going on in Minnesota is ridiculous, when realistically all they would have to do is pull the ICE agents from Minnesota, pull them out, move them on, and stop the ridiculous crackdown of immigration. Now, one of the things and one of the arguments you hear from people on the right when it comes to immigration crackdowns, you hear two. One, oh, you guys just want open borders. No, a lot of us do not want open borders. We understand that our immigration system is broken. Okay, it's expensive. It is bogged down. There are people who have been trying to do this the right way. And of course, ICE doesn't care that they're trying to do it the right way. They show up at their court date where they're trying to do their immigration hearing and get picked up and they try to deport them. Things like that. But there are people who have been trying to do it the legal way, that because there is such a backlog of cases that, you know, the judges are years behind in hearing these cases. So they're allowed to be here, in some cases allowed to work here, etc., for a while before they are ever decided on as to whether or not they get full legal status. And sometimes they fall through the cracks because the system is such a mess. We hear that sometimes they end up in other areas where they're away, like they don't even know where their case is being heard. They've gotten what did I hear? I heard some people in like Texas were getting sent to, and their case was being heard in California, or for example, something like that. So they had to figure out how to get to California and then to make their hearing. The system is broken. But instead of fixing the system, Donald Trump wants to abuse what's already there and just say everybody needs to go. The other argument we hear is from people who say, well, Biden deported so many more people. That's true. They used to call him the deporter in chief. But the big difference with not Biden, I think I said Biden, Obama. Obama deported way more people than Donald Trump. But that was over 8 years, not 1 year like we are seeing now. And Obama did it legally. He gave everybody due process. The ones they were cracking down on, and when you see there's an audio clip that has been floating around that the people on the right like to constantly bring up, where he talks about if you're here, you will be deported. What he was talking about and what they cut out of the first part of that clip is he is talking about immigrants who are here but have already been through court and had already gotten an order of removal from the court. So that was part of it. Obama, yes, deported a lot more people than Donald Trump, but he did it the right way. The other side of that coin is because he was doing it the right way and using the processes that were there, it was way more humane. You didn't have a makeshift army roaming streets of cities killing citizens. And two, he did it for a lot less because he wasn't spending all this money on, again, a makeshift military answerable only to the president, going around door to door trying to, demand people's papers and get access without warrant and all kinds of things. What everybody in this administration fails to realize, they think they are going to be golden. That on his way out the door, that Donald Trump is going to make it. He is going to make it all the way to 2029. And on the way out the door, that Donnie is going to pardon every one of them and they are going to be in the clear. There's multiple problems with that, starting with no, they're not going to be in the clear. One, because I don't think he makes it to 2029. I don't think he lives that long. And the way his dementia is progressing, they are going to have to potentially get him on his deathbed, because I think that's what's coming, to sign a pardon for everybody involved. And they would do it on like the last day of Donald Trump being around as close as they could. That way, JD Vance doesn't have to deal with it, and he could quietly move away from this ICE thing, and just kind of put it to rest. But then they'd already have the pardon, so they wouldn't get federal charges. That's problem one. Problem two is there's no pardon on the federal level that clears state charges. Every state has their own version of what it takes to get a pardon. Some governors can issue presidential type pardons where they can get you before You have gone through the criminal justice system before you are convicted. Other states have it where not only do you have to be convicted, you have to have served at least so much of your sentence or your whole sentence. And it's basically just saying we are going to forgive it off your record, but you still had already paid your debt to society. The rules for state level charges are different and they vary state to state. So, with that being said, these people have to worry about when Donald Trump is gone, what that going to look like? Now, what I think is going to happen first is, again, I don't think Donald Trump makes it to the end of his term. But I think when JD Vance takes over, he quietly moves away from everything that has been going on with ICE. It just kind of fades into the background. And then when the Democrats are back in power, probably after 26, the midterms, they're going to start congressional investigations. But when Democrats fully have power again, I believe after 28's general election, there's going to be our version of the Nuremberg trials. Very public trials where a defense of I was just following orders is not going to fly. Okay. One other thing with this shooting in Minneapolis is Attorney General Pam Bondi came out and she said to Governor Tim Walz in a letter that they would remove ICE from Minnesota completely and stop immigration enforcement completely in Minnesota if Tim Walz just turned over the voter rolls for the state of Minnesota. Now, why do they want the voter rolls? Well, what they claim is they want to look into the Civil Rights Act, the Civil Rights Voting Act, and make sure Minnesota is complying. Except Minnesota hasn't been one of the states that's had a lot of complaints. Those usually come from southern states, places like Texas and Mississippi, Louisiana, etc., where courts have said in the past that, hey, your maps are racially gerrymandered and they are illegal. Fix them. Okay. Well, that's where we're at here, right? That's what they're claiming is that it is racially motivated. That they need to see the voter rolls to make sure Minnesota is following the Voting Rights Act. But I don't think that's what's going on. One, I think they are trying to get the voter information so they know who to target in the next election, who they can try to intimidate into voting Republican or maybe not voting. They also are looking for people they can challenge for their right to vote. Because this administration and Republicans in general have been pushing for a long time about voter ID and this idea that you need to have all of the correct documentation in order to vote. And one of the problems with what they're talking about is this idea that your ID must match your birth certificate in order to vote. Well, here's a problem with that. When you legally change your name, in most cases, you are not given a new birth certificate. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule. Adoptions being one, is in some cases, adoptees are issued a brand new birth certificate because of having to block out and prevent people from knowing the biological parents' information. But for a lot of people who get married or legally change their name for one reason or another, they aren't always issued new birth certificates. They have to go then and have not only their birth certificate, but the name change paperwork. If you've gotten married, a lot of times you would need to have the birth certificate, the marriage license, and the name change associated with it to prove all three and to prove all of your documentation. It's all about trying to make it so that it is harder to vote. I think they are also looking at just trying to figure out who they can intimidate to either vote Republican or to not vote, etc., because Republicans are wanting to flip Minnesota. I don't think they're going to have a chance um, because even though Governor Tim Walz is not running, Democrats have been widely successful in Minnesota going back to before Reagan. They were like the only state who did not vote for Reagan during his second term. Now, they were the smartest of us, but still. So Pam Bondi is trying to get the voter registration, and she's saying ICE would leave if that gets turned over to the DOJ. Here's the other problem with that. ICE and Border Patrol, etc., are not under the DOJ. They're under Department of Homeland Security. That would be Kristi Noem. So why is Pam Bondi speaking for Kristi Noem? Is Kristi Noem on her way out? Maybe. Are they looking to replace her? Possibly. We've heard that even Republicans are getting frustrated with Kristi Noem and that she could be on very short notice for being replaced. That Donald Trump may ask for her resignation or just straight fire her. So that could be a possibility as to why Pam Bondi is doing that. It could be just straight bullshit that he comes to a deal with Pam Bondi and she goes, well, yeah, but I'm not overseeing ICE. So gotcha. And they get the voter rolls and Tim Walz looks dumb. Now, I never expected Minnesota to turn over their voter rolls. And Tim Walz came back with the perfect response. And I did this in a TikTok, which is currently sitting there waiting for whatever issues to resolve. So hopefully you guys get to see it. But effectively, what I said is exactly what Tim Walz said. He goes, well, you're wanting to see our voter rolls. He goes, but you got something bigger on your plate. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit here. But he goes, we have over 2 million documents that we have yet to be released from the Epstein files. How about you get to work on those? And that's the perfect response. Remember, the only reason we have the Epstein files needing to be released at all is because of Republicans. Okay. Republicans were pushing, MAGAs were pushing for the release of the Epstein files, in part because MAGAs and Republican voters have been told for decades that the only people who could do those horrible things to children had to be Democrats. Okay. Donald Trump ran on a campaign of releasing the Epstein files. And then he has tried numerous times to say, well, there's nothing to see here. Why are we still talking about that guy? He's long gone. You know, there were no co-conspirators. They've tried everything to deflect away, but MAGA wants to see it. They want their proof that it is nothing but evil Democrats on the Epstein files. Okay. So they want their proof, and Pam Bondi and the DOJ is not giving it to them. They are fucking around with it, putting it bluntly. They're just trying to delay. We've gotten less than 1% of the Epstein files having been released so far. And what's going on with that is they're trying to find any reason to not release anything. So Tim Walz was right. Don't worry about Minnesota's voter rolls. Release the files. But they're not going to release the files because they're trying to protect people. Now, we have heard this story about Sasha Riley and still have not been able to prove that Sasha Riley's story is true. It is compelling, and there are reasons I would like to believe it is true, starting with the fact that Donald Trump is ignoring it completely. Now, normal people would ignore fake stories and say, I'm not going to dignify that with a response, and I'm just going to ignore it. It will go away on its own. But that's not how Donald Trump operates. He threatens to sue. And he has threatened to sue when there are things that are legitimately true. not nearly as damning, but legitimately true out there. He's threatened to sue. And yet suddenly he's not talking about Sasha Riley. Doesn't acknowledge that Sasha Riley exists. Doesn't talk about what's being said. Now, there is something to be said for Donald Trump not having a clue that this is actually going on and that they're not telling him that Sasha Riley is talking. That's possible. But because Donald Trump is not reacting to it, makes me believe it could be true. Well, according to Sasha Riley, Donald Trump was the actual kingpin. Now, that could be why they do not want the Epstein files released. And it would kind of make sense because Epstein, for years, had talked about Donald Trump having been the mentor to him. So, why, if Donald Trump was the mentor, would he be farther down on the podium or in the pecking order for this deal? Well, there's a lot of speculation that Donald Trump was closer to the top than Epstein, and that maybe, just maybe, Donald Trump was the uh, the actual kingpin, but Epstein was the patsy, the fall guy. We are still waiting for those Epstein files to be released. Now, we do not need them all. We just need a couple of good incriminating photos of Donald Trump, and the Republicans would be ready to turn on him. We've already heard they have the votes, at least according to Don Bacon, to turn on Donald Trump if he decides to militarily invade Greenland. And I guarantee you there's going to be even more people ready to go against him if it comes out that he is deep in the Epstein files and he is actually the kingpin. That the Republican Party as a whole, it will become a dog pile. Now, one of the things I think is going to happen when they get to that point where they decide to remove Donald Trump, I don't think the Republicans are going to do it until they have the votes in the Senate to actually succeed. But then it's going to become a dog pile. Okay, I think you're going to see articles of impeachment pass with 70 or 80% of the entire House voting to pass it. It's not going to squeak by because I think once they make that move and they decide they are going to remove Donald Trump, the Republicans in Congress are going to say, okay, we got to get out in front of this and we got to make it look like we were always in favor of getting rid of Donald Trump the entire time. And then when it gets to the Senate, same problem. I think they are going to have more than enough votes to convict him when it happens. Now, maybe it won't, it might be instead of 67, maybe it's only 70 or 71. But considering we couldn't get that close after January 6th, and they tried to say, well, it's really a criminal matter. It's not a political matter at this point because he's out of office. What would it hurt to just let it become a criminal matter? Um, I the fact that they would all pile on like that would be huge. Now we'll see if I'm right, but one of the things that could sink him is the Epstein files. And something as simple as having one or two good pictures, not that they are good for their content, but I think you know what I mean by that, where it comes out with him having an underage girl sitting on his lap. And when that comes out, it's gonna sink him. And I think the Republicans would be willing to make that move. Now that would lead up to JD Vance. Now JD Vance is not going to be as dangerous as Donald Trump. Not by a long shot. For a couple of reasons. One, I think he's going to be given marching orders by the Republican Party to fix their image. You're going to see ICE kind of fade off into obscurity. We're not going to hear about things going on. He's going to be de-escalating tensions around the world. He's going to let the tariffs go, those kind of things. He's going to try to bring things back to more of a Bush era philosophy while still blaming the Democrats for everything that's going on. And then when they get to that point, their whole goal is going to be making JD Vance as sympathetic as possible so they have a better chance of winning in either the midterms or 28 or both. I don't think it's going to work, but I think that's where they're going to be at. And I think JD is going to be on a very short leash with the Republicans And if they just successfully removed Donald Trump, who by far is way more popular than JD Vance, if I was JD Vance, I would put my head down, try to stay off their radar, and hope that they do not go after me as well. Okay, so that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope to be back tomorrow with another podcast and hopefully more TikToks. Hopefully, TikTok is being more cooperative, and I'm allowed to get some things posted and go from there. So, thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.